Recording in progress.
Hello everyone, good afternoon. We'll probably wait for a minute and let everyone join, and then we'll start. So yeah, I think we can begin. We have enough number of attendees. So thank you all for joining us today. My name is Arushi, and I hope you all are doing well. I am Program Manager Digital Initiatives from IndiaBioscience, and we also have Jatin from Taylor and Francis Group. We'll be the moderators for this session today. And on behalf of Taylor and Francis and IndiaBioscience, I'm pleased to welcome you all to this workshop. The topic that we are covering for today's session is Ethics in the Age of Open Science, focused particularly on the best practices and real-life case studies in medical publishing. So firstly, before we sort of begin the webinar, let's do a quick technical check. So on your Zoom panel, under the Reactions tab, there must be a raise hand icon. So can you all just click this to indicate that you can all hear me, see the first slide that's already on your screen? That will just help us. Or probably use the chat box to, indicate that you can all hear me and see me. Yeah, so great, thank you all. And a little housekeeping before we get started. Your mics will be muted during the session. So if you have any questions or would like to talk about it to any of the speakers, you could type them into the Q&A box. And we'll be taking all the questions up together post the presentation. And this session is going to basically focus on the intricate nuances of ethics and best practices in academic publishing within the field of medicine. So it will provide you with an overview of do's and don'ts of research articles. How do you translate insights into identifying a high quality journal? What are the markers of a good quality journal? How do you identify whether a journal is good fit for your research, and so on and so forth? So we have speakers and in-house experts today. The speaker for the day is Anant Bhan, and he is the mentor and principal investigator for Bhopal Hub at Sangat, India, and brings a wealth of expertise for over 18 years of experience and numerous publications to his name. Anant has also been a resource person for trainings in global health, research methodology, research ethics, and public health ethics. And also, if you are on Twitter, I don't think he needs an introduction. So that is about Anant. And our in-house experts are from Taylor and Francis Group. Firstly, Alexandra Carrick. Alexandra is a portfolio manager with medicine journals editorial team at TNF. She brings a vast pool of knowledge for article writing practices. How do you go about choosing the right journal, following journal level instructions, especially which are important for the author. So if you are anybody who is planning to submit an article or put out a research paper, then you do not want to miss what she's going to talk in the next 20 minutes. We also have Jyoti Bajaj with us. Jyoti is the Senior Manager for Content Integrity at TNF. She'll be exploring the complex nuances of ethics in academic publishing, along with the do's and don'ts of research articles through utilizing a lot of interactive case studies and real-life examples. So without further ado, let us commence with the session. Over to you, Alex.
Thank you very much. As mentioned, my name is Alexandra Carrick and I'm Portfolio Manager at Taylor & Francis, and I'm here to give you an overview of publishing your papers. I realise some of you may be very experienced and some of you may be starting out in your career writing articles. So without further ado, I'll talk to you a little bit about Taylor & Francis Medicine and Health Publishing journals and avenues. So before you even start writing, it's very good to familiarize yourselves with a number of different aspects. Here are some of the key ones. So do research your topic, explore the relevance of the topic to your audience, find your best way of communication to the audience. For example, one of the key things is to keep it as simple as possible, and where possible to avoid jargon. Explore your target audience. Are you trying to reach out to a huge variety of different topics and researchers, or are you targeting a journal which is very specific in a particular area of medicine and health? Also, do look into your publishing, your institutional requirements. Is your institution asking you to publish in a specific type of journal? Should it be open access, for example? Explore all the publishing options. And above all, remember you're joining a conversation. Hopefully it's not just you publishing a paper, it will lead to interactions over the future. So when you're choosing a journal, these are also a number of different options that considerations that you should take into account. Do read, and I'm sure most people do, the literature online, and if you have it in print, talk to your colleagues about the journal that you're thinking about submitting to, and even people at conferences or online. Understand how the publications will target your audience. Look at potential journals, and also read the aims and scope of those journals very carefully, and the instructions to authors. So I'm going to show you a real example of one of the journals in medicine and health. As you can see, this targets a very specific area in medicine and health, so looking at aging, the aging process, and male health. You can see parts of the aims and scope that are underlined, which are indicating the types of research papers that they're looking for, research articles as well as reviews, and also it's linked with an associate society. I'm just going to give you a quick overview of Taylor & Francis and some of the imprints that we publish. So Taylor & Francis, as you know, is one of the world's leading publishers of advanced, emerging and applied research. There are over 2,700 high-quality journals across a range of areas. And in medicine and health alone, we have around 384 different journals, both hybrid subscription titles and fully open access journals. We also provide authors with a wide range of tools so that they can promote their research, for example, as well as other forms of research communication. I'm going to also highlight Dove Medical Press, which is part of Taylor & Francis. These are a group of fully open access journals. They were formed in 2003, but they've been part of Taylor & Francis for about 5 years or so now. And they specialize in the publication of open access peer-reviewed titles over a broad spectrum of medical journals, but especially medicine and health. And last but not least, the expert medicine group of journals, which were formerly Future Science. There are 27 journals which now sit within the expert medicine collection, and there's 17 journals that are hybrid subscription journals. So I'd encourage you to explore the Taylor & Francis website and have a look at some of these different types of journals and imprints and brands. So just stopping quickly, some of you may be very familiar with open access, but just doing a quick poll, have any of you published in an open access journal before? Just wait a moment or two. But don't worry if you don't have a chance to do this. We can perhaps go back to this later on in the questions. So open access, as you probably will know, is making content available online in perpetuity, meaning that anybody and anywhere can read your research. And also the benefit of this will be that content is reusable. On a lot of occasions, this will be without restrictions, but there may be a few imposed by the licenses, which we'll talk a little bit about in a minute. So there are a huge variety of open access publishing models, but I'm going to talk about the main two, the most frequently available and the ones that are most common at Taylor and Francis. So Gold open access, we have on the left, fully open access titles, and people will publish in these journals, and the article, this will be funded by an article processing charge, which will be typically covered by the institution or the funder, or sometimes by an institutional agreement, or in a few rare cases by the authors themselves. For hybrid open access, these were what once were fully subscription titles, and the subscriptions would be paid by libraries or institutions. And again, people can pay an article publication charge to publish in those journals open access, but obviously they can still publish without fees in these hybrid titles. If you're very interested in finding out different options within Taylor and Francis, we have an open access cost finder. So you can, on the right, you may be able to see we have subject categories, so you can explore different subject area categories, including medicine and health. If you know the journal that you're interested in publishing, you can also have a look at that particular journal. But it will tell you the different open access options, whether it's a fully open access title or open select, which is what we call hybrid titles at Taylor and Francis. And again, you can choose Dove Press or Taylor and Francis as different imprints. Here, most importantly, I'm going to show a shot of some of the institutions that already have an organizational agreement with Taylor and Francis for publishing open access. Please do read these individual agreements very carefully because they differ by institution. Some of them may focus on hybrid titles alone, and then some of them may be focused around fully open access titles and also hybrid titles. I've also included a link at the bottom, and I'm sure we'll be sharing those at the end of the presentations. So getting back to licenses for open access titles and publications, this was what had been called in the past a copyright transfer agreement, but now with open access, we're publishing these under a licensing model. The licensing model we use is Creative Commons, CC. BY means that others must acknowledge when they use your work, and there are also a number of other variations of the CC BY license, as you can see here. So NC is you can only use the work for non-commercial purposes. There's another one, which is ND, which is non-derivative. Others cannot use your work or amend it. And finally, SA, which stands for share alike, so that others can obviously use your work, but it must be used under the same license that you originally used for your publication. Obviously, ethical issues were around before the advent of open access, but they've come to the fore quite recently a lot again. They pose a serious threat to both researchers publishing and also the medical literature itself. Unfortunately, the email at the bottom of this slide is an actual example of an email that was sent to somebody at Taylor and Francis advertising for profit to publish their article in a predatory journal. So what can you do to prevent yourself publishing in one of these journals? So obviously do your research, looking at the journal website. Sometimes these may be very misleading, so it may not be immediately obvious that this is a predatory title. So have a look whether the journals are indexed in respective indexes and archives. Review the published articles in the journal for quality, and also talk to your colleagues and librarians and make sure that they have robust ethical policies. And this particular website, Think, Check, Submit, is very, very useful in helping give guidelines about predatory publications. So I would recommend that people go and take a look at that in their own time. Now you've thought about all those factors, going away and preparing your manuscript, some basic tips. Obviously, write the manuscript and then edit it later. Keep it simple, as we discussed before. Express very simply if possible. This is on the slide is a typical structure of a research article, but obviously different article types and different journals will have different structures. But make sure your story is consistent and easy to follow, but above all, try and make it as interesting for your audience as possible and the editors and reviewers. Writing an abstract, this is also very, very important. Think about the purpose of the abstract for editors, peer reviewers, and readers. Check the instructions for authors, IFAs. Also focus on the essential information in your story. What is the background? What are the objectives? What are your methods? And most importantly, what did you find? What were the outcomes? Again, using clear, accessible, jargon-free language. And above all, if you're asked by reviewers or editors to revise your paper, remember to update the abstract. Feedback is also very crucial, and this comes even before you send your article to a journal. So you may want to talk to colleagues about your work. If you're presenting at conferences or you're going to conferences and you talk to people at conferences, you may want to discuss your work with them. And there are even writing groups that you can discuss your paper or articles with online. Above all, make sure that your paper is in the best possible shape before you submit it. I'm going to give a very quick example of author guidelines before you're actually pressing the button to submit. And this is going to be showing some of the main areas that you should be looking at before you submit your paper. So waivers, peer review, types of articles, reporting guidelines, manuscript guidelines, and data sharing policy are some of the most important things you can look at. Also, before you finally submit your paper, you should identify who the authors are, who qualifies. So we've talked a little bit about, unfortunately, ethical issues and authorship for sale, but who qualifies? It's those people who are making a significant contribution to the work, have drafted or written or revised or reviewed the article, have agreed on the journal to which the paper has been submitted. Sometimes this has not happened in the past, so it's very important that everybody agrees on it and also take responsibility, and they're accountable for all the contents of the article and have reviewed all versions. Above all, and this is very, very important, any author listed as a representative of the published paper, and although the corresponding author signs the author publishing agreement, all the authors have responsibility for the final paper. So that's what it is meant when it says authorship comes with responsibilities. So we talked a little bit about publishing ethics and integrity, and you can see some of the most common ones. I won't read everything out. Some of them are a result of perhaps lack of knowledge around publishing ethics. There may be people, authors, who are not sure about what is acceptable. So it's good to sort of find out from colleagues or from workshops that publishers offer what is actually expected. And these can go all the way through to the worst kind of publishing ethic issues, such as paper mills, where authorship is offered for sale for predatory publications. And Jyoti will be exploring some of this at a later time. So in terms of ChatGPT and generative AI, this is part of our ethical policy. And although you may know that we do not allow ChatGPT or artificial intelligence tools to act as an author, if you do, for example, use AI to revise the language of your paper, please acknowledge it in the acknowledgements as listed in the slides here. Duplicate submissions, you all probably know this already, that you should only submit to one journal and not multiple submissions at the same time. It's fine if you've had your paper rejected and then you go on to submit to another journal. There may be a couple of cases where duplicate submission is okay. So, for example, if it's a translation of something that was already in another language, with the agreement of the original copyright holder and the journal, you can also submit a new version in a different language. Data presented at conferences, such as posters, presentations, can also be submitted to a journal, but obviously in all cases here, all three cases, you should acknowledge the original source. And finally, posting in a preprint server or a repository is also fine. Before you actually click the final submit button, do gather all your materials together, all the files. Make sure you have permission to use, for example, graphics from other journal articles from other authors. Make sure you have all the required ethical disclosures, your ORCID ID, if you have one. If you don't, it may be something for you to explore to acquire one. And also all the information needed for your co-authors, all their information details, not just email address, but you may need institutional details as well. And as we've already said, agreement from all your co-authors about the journal that you're going to submit to. And if you're submitting to a double anonymized version, if you're submitting to a journal where they require double anonymized peer review, please make sure you have an anonymized version of your paper. These are on the right-hand side, the main systems we have at Taylor & Francis. We have editorial manager at the top part of the slide, and at the bottom we have Scholar One. But as an author, you will always see, or in many cases, you will see the submission portal on the left-hand side. And there's a link to these at the bottom of the slide here. So peer review, as most of you know, is a gold standard for ensuring trust and integrity of scholarly communication. And this is a really nice quote by Andrew Preston's of Publon, summarizing that, which we'll send around later. What are the different types of peer review? So many of you may be familiar with single anonymous, where you obviously submit your articles, but reviewers know your identity, but you don't know the identity of the authors of the journal you've submitted to. Double anonymous, this is where the reviewers don't know the identity of the authors, and the authors don't know the identity of the reviewers. And in many cases, we're starting to, and other publishers are starting to pilot open peer review, where the peer reviews are often published online and also the names of the peer reviewers. This is a very quick summary of the process. You may be familiar with this already. Obviously, there's accept, revision, and reject. Frequently, you'll be asked to make amendments after the paper has been considered by the journal as appropriate, and the peer reviewers have given your paper their responses. And responding to the reviewers' comments, don't become disheartened. Most of the best scientists in the world have had their papers rejected. Consult with your co-authors, and if the reviewers has misunderstood something, do state clearly what you think they should have found out in your original paper, and be polite.
Alex, just a quick time check.
Yes.
We're almost out of time, so if you could just, yeah.
So address all the comments, be professional and respectful. Almost last slide now. And these are the top 10 reasons for rejection. Most of these are very, very, very self-explanatory, but also some of them are quite serious, libelous and unethical comments, lacking objectivity. So just a quick mention about author services at Taylor and Francis, but I'll finish up here and say thank you for inviting me and thank you for listening. If you have any questions, there's an email address where you can find out more, and we hope to hear from you and see your manuscripts soon. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Alex. I'm sure audience will have a very good idea now about how do go about choosing a right journal, what are the do's and don'ts, and what are the things that you have to remember as authors. And hopefully Taylor and Francis is going to see a lot of manuscripts coming their way. So yeah, if there are any questions for Alex, I would again request everyone to type in their questions in the Q&A box, and we'll be taking up all the questions towards the end of the speakers, after all the speakers have spoken their part. So the second speaker is Anant. So I think I'll let Anant take over.
Thank you so much, Arushi. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Good morning if you're joining from the African region. So I think what I'll try and do in my presentation is build on what Alex already started speaking to, which are key issues in publication ethics. And that's what I'll focus on with an idea, I think that, we will delve into some of the background controversies, but also try to think about, especially in an LMIC context, what might be some potential solutions. So I want to confirm, Arushi, that you can see my slides.
Yes, we can.
All right. Okay. So, being a scientist, which is what most of us are, right, as researchers, whether you are a biomedical scientist, a clinician researcher, a lab researcher, there are certain expectations of being a scientist. One of them is certainly integrity, right? And this landmark publication, which came from the National Academies Press in 2009, spoke to a few core values of being a good scientist, being honest, being skeptical, which is what all of us are trained to be when we are doing our graduation and post-graduation PhDs, that, whenever you see a published article, read it thoroughly, criticize the methods, the results, the data, etc., from a skeptical perspective. But you need to be fair, right? So you're not criticizing the scientists, you're criticizing the science if there is something to be criticized. So your engagement needs to be collegial, and you need to be open to that same criticism if you're extending that to other scientists. Now, the challenge has been that with the spread of publishing as becoming a core requirement for progression of careers, responsible conduct of research has become a core area of work, because there are a lot of controversies which pan out. And this is a good example. This was highlighted in the New York Times last year, where a researcher who was actually supposed to be researching honesty, right, which you would tend to think is something which is related to good approaches to responsible conduct, was himself found to be or accused of fabricating findings, and that's part of the problem. Now, this should not surprise us, because we've seen this happen through the pandemic as well, where there was a whole description of, while the pandemic was happening, there was a paperdemic happening with everyone wanting to publish and publish fast. And this actually impacted some of the leading journals, right? So you would remember there was a slew of retractions which happened, which impacted both the Lancet and the New England Journal of Medicine. Leading biomedical journals, high impact factors, considered very respectful. But in the race to publish, both of them clearly were deceived by the submissions. And the other issue, which also I think a lot of publishers and academia are talking about, is the fact that there seems to be also a growing trade in authorship, where people are offering to give co-authorship slots in exchange for money. And there are online advertisements. Maybe some of you would have seen this on social media. Maybe some of you have received these kinds of invites, and that is really troubling, right? Because it means those who are honestly doing science, who are spending a lot of time doing research, are probably going to be at a disadvantage, because there are other people who are able to purchase authorship slots. And that is something that we need to think about. Now, Alex also spoke about the use of AI tools, including ChatGPT. And this is a good example, which was highlighted on social media, where clearly someone had used these tools, forgotten to edit it out, and it was right there in the publication, right up front, clearly showing that this is being now something which is being deployed. And editors and publishers are often scrambling to try to figure out mechanisms to respond to that. We also need to recognize that predatory publishing is something which is a major challenge, and I think many of us who are living in LMICs know, because we receive emails almost every day. But the fact that these are sometimes also very large corporations which are operating, which are doing predatory publications, and there was this expose in the Indian Express a few years ago about some of them which are based in India. So something for us to think about. So in that light, given all of that controversy and that cause for concern, there are a few areas that I wanted to highlight, and highlight also because this is an important area from a science quality perspective, right? If you look at why the majority of retracted scientific publications have had that fate, you will see that the vast majority of those are in some way related to research misconduct, right? So if there are so many retractions happening, and most of them are about research misconduct, and that's something that we need to think about. And of course, there have been various analyses. This is an analysis from almost 12 years ago, which spoke about the fact that when they looked at retracted papers and sort of research misconduct, their calculation was that this is somewhere between around 1% of all papers which are published, and these are based on fraudulent data. That at that point of time was already 20,000 papers worldwide each year. I think this is probably an underestimate. And today in 2024, the number and maybe the percentage is probably higher. And that again should make us think about what are some of the problems, right? Now, it's not just an issue that there are many papers being published with fraudulent data. The challenge also is that there is a financial cost, there is a human resource cost, there is a time cost attached to it, right? Now, each paper which gets retracted in this analysis in 2014 was linked to almost 400,000 of US taxpayer money being wasted, right? Now, this is in the context of US and NIH funding, but you would see that this will be also similarly a major issue for funders, especially those which are coming in from public sources, where money which is being kept specifically for research purposes is basically going to get wasted because of fraudulent research which is happening. And that's where I think something important for us to remember are what are major causes for concern. Alex spoke to these around falsification, fabrication, plagiarism, but also some other serious deviations from accepted research practice. And why is this a problem? One, of course, when you tend to think that, I want to do good quality science, I want to do it properly. If someone is not doing that, then in your mind, morally, that's something which is unacceptable, right? It's inherently wrong. It's a wastage of resources, as we discussed. It could be potentially harmful, because if there are results which are drawn from these studies, which are based on research misconduct, then that data is not something that you can trust. But that data could be used, for example, to allow for the marketing of a new medication or a new device, right? And maybe that device doesn't work, but the data indicates that it works. Maybe that device or drug is harmful, but that data has been suppressed. So this could potentially cause harm to the consumers, to patients, etc. And once this is known to the wider world, and we've seen that also happen during the pandemic, it erodes public confidence in science. People start distrusting research. They start questioning results which are shared, right? And that is something which could impact the trust element, which is very important. Now, of course, people sometimes don't do these acts intentionally. It might sometimes be that it is a mistake. It's something which you overlooked or you were careless. But where there is clear fraud, where there is clear intent, that is what I think we need to think about. And part of the challenge is that a lot of co-authors often dissociate themselves from some of these publications which are highlighted as having something which is fraudulent in nature. And that is a problem, right? Because if the co-authors say that, well, it was not me, it was a co-author who wrote that paper, and they are the one who did this kind of misconduct, then it also shows that there is a problem, right? As co-authors, we are not able to ensure that there is a fidelity of data, a fidelity of methods, etc. Then, what job are you doing being a co-author on that paper, right? So that's also, we've seen that happen with many senior authors, including from our countries. You might all have heard of instances like this. Now, interestingly, when scientists are approached and asked, how many of you have fabricated and falsified research, right? So around 2% in this study admitted to fabricating, falsifying, or modifying data, and 34% admitted to other forms of questionable research practices, such as selective reporting of data, excluding some data from analysis, saying something in their initial proposal and ethics committee submission, but collecting more data than that. Very interestingly, when they were asked what proportion of your colleagues or of the science community do you think are indulging in this, then the numbers go up. Their perception of other people doing fabrication, falsification, around 15% of the scientists that I know are doing this. Around 72% of the people that I know are doing questionable research practices. So somehow this feeling that I am doing generally okay, I'm not doing all of these practices or doing it very less, but other people are doing it, right? But again, shows us that within the science community also there is a certain distrust around it. And again, I think this is something we need to worry about, because it undermines the integrity of science. It could mean that the conclusions we are drawing from the science which is being funded might not be justified. It might lead to people getting career advancement because they keep publishing, but clearly they're not publishing based on valid science. They're actually just probably coming up with data sitting on their computers. It removes the incentive to do good science. If you see other people progressing in their careers because they're publishing very fast, but you're sure that they're not really spending time doing good quality research, then you would tend to think, why should I make the effort? Right? Why should I not do that and also get promoted to associate professional professor, additional professor? It removes the incentive for good scientists, and that's something we should also think about. Now, of course, what do we need to do in response? We need to detect these kinds of instances happening. But while peer review is an important element, and that's why it's been instituted, there is also a challenge. And the challenge is that it's sometimes difficult with the increasing number of publications to find skilled, it should be find and not fund, find skilled reviewers. And I think editors struggle with this all the time because there are an excessive number of papers. And the downside to that is that sometimes there are publications which then create an evidence which is then emulated or put into clinical practice, but later on they discover that actually there was something wrong, right? So this is an example of a paper which was published in the Journal of American Medical Association, JAMA, which later on was discovered once they reran the analysis that originally the study was shown to have a strong benefit of the intervention, but the actual result was harm, right? So as you can see, the result was radically or almost diametrically opposite of the intervention, not benefiting strongly, but actually creating harm. And that's the problem with fraudulent science. That's the problem with science which has not been evaluated properly. Because if this publication led to patient care being changed based on that original publication, then it could actually potentially have caused harm to patients, right? So this is not theoretical. This is what is happening in the real world. Of course, one way of trying to detect fraud is to try to replicate studies, but it's very difficult to get funding for that, right? For anything which is duplicative science, funders are not interested. That's not a priority for them. Whistleblowers, yes, that is one way to approach it, but as we all know, there are very few protective mechanisms for whistleblowers, and they often struggle because of a lack of policies, and they are often shunned, they're thrown out of institutions, etc. Now, the other element to that is plagiarism, right? Because you could have just fabricated data or fraudulent data, but you also have a lot of issues around plagiarism, which is also a wider issue which we need to talk about, where people are basically just copying information or copying text from other sources without proper attribution, right? And of course, there is a history to this from Latin, but it's also something which has been widely described in many of our countries, right? So this is a classical one where the Robbins textbook of pathology, which is one of the most well-respected books in pathology, the Indian edition, there was an allegation by the author that an Indian textbook in pathology had actually plagiarized content from the original Robbins textbook of pathology, and that too coming from a very respected medical college. A respected institution like the Postgraduate Institute of Medical Education and Research in Chandigarh, which is one of India's leading national institutions in biomedicine, also actually found some of their faculty guilty of plagiarism, right? Or at least there was an allegation. So that this is clearly happening in our leading institutions. And similarly, again, is problematic because it could lead to a lot of unnecessary publications. It's one kind of stealing the integrity of the scientists, and many of their co-authors, their whole history of research can be questioned based on one paper where plagiarism is established. So that's something for us to think about. Now, of course, Alex spoke about the fact that there are also issues around authorship. That's also an important area for all of us. And in fact, this is one area I think where almost everyone who's been a scientist has a story around not being listed incorrectly, someone gaining primary authorship based on work that they had actually not done, etc. So there are norms, but are these norms followed, right? And Alex spoke about the norms which exist, the ICMJE guidelines, the Vancouver guidelines. But part of the challenge, and this is not new in our context, is this issue of emblematic, sort of culture. And one good example, this was a senior physician who had written about this in the mid-90s, speaking about the fact that in some countries like India, there is this culture of gift authorship, and he called that a syndrome. And the syndrome name that he kept was polyauthoritis giftosa, right? You know, that this is something which has become almost like an epidemic within our fields, and this is something that we need to talk about. Also issues around who needs to be listed, do senior persons need to be automatically listed, the head of the department, the dean of the college or the institution, should we be actually listing actual contributions? And in fact, because of all of this, our colleagues are at Sangat Bhopal, where I'm based, we are also doing this study to try to understand some of these issues, especially from an LMIC context, an early career researcher perspective, to try to understand that given all of these challenges, what is it that we can find? And the study is called Decoding Authorship Praxis, where we are going to try to explore, using qualitative interactions from researchers, how they struggle with issues around authorship, what are their perspectives, and what can we do to improve things, right? Now, why is it that people do this, right? Why is it people indulge in research misconduct, in fabrication, in falsification, in plagiarism? Now, there is a clear culture issue also because there is a strong focus on publish or perish, which we all know. There are sometimes pressures from institutions, from funders, from your mentors, from your guides, and sometimes many of these expectations can be unreasonable. There is this expectation that you will need to publish this amount if you want to retain your position, if you want to get your next grant, if you want to secure your salary, etc. And that can push people to think about indulging in some of this. So that's on authorship. But I think it's also important for us to expand the language of what should constitute as research misconduct. And I think increasingly over the last few years, issues such as harassment in academic institutions, bullying in research groups have also been brought up as being important issues we should all speak to, because this is also rampant. This is rampant in medicine, this is rampant in science. There is a certain predatory approach which can be there. There is a lot of hierarchy which is there, which can actually cause a lot of, and unfortunately, we've also lost medical students, residents, young researchers to bullying and harassment, and that's something we need to think about. How do we respond, right? How do we respond to this issue, and what do we need to do differently? Now, for publishers, for example, and for editors, they need to be open to publishing science, which is not necessarily very innovative, right? Or which does not necessarily tell you the next big thing in medicine or devices or interventions. So negative results, how many journals are willing to publish that? Because once we have more and more negative results published, maybe people will be more willing to publish data which is not so positive, but which tells us something about the science, which helps us understand what is working and not working. Universities can have clear policies and institutional mechanisms so that they can help address this issue of predatory science and predatory publication, and partnerships between institutions in high-income countries and low-income countries, low and middle-income countries can help provide those mechanisms, the support, the background information, access to articles, etc., and also have mechanisms where people are not forced into publishing. Because if that's seen the only way to get career progression, then maybe that's part of the problem. So one other set of important recommendations would also be for all of our institutions to think about how do we build in these kinds of discussions of the kind we are having in the webinar today, where ethical issues as they arise in the publication space, in the research conduct space are openly discussed, where they're inbuilt into our education, so that people are discussing these openly, talking about what is acceptable, what is not acceptable, where you have positive reinforcement through incidental awards, where mentorship shows the right way to approach issues such as authorship, issues such as how do you approach doing a good quality study. I think for me, from my perspective, this is the single most important thing. If principal investigators, if senior leads within institutions demonstrate by mentorship what is the right way to approach good quality science, then that is what I think becomes the institutional culture. That is what the trainees learn, and that is what the trainees will take when they go ahead and establish their own labs, their own research groups, right? So this is something which is extremely important. That's where I think all of you will have a critical role to play. If you want to imagine a different future in our institutions, in our scientific endeavors, then I think demonstrating good conduct is extremely important, and the kind of mentorship involved is important, right? Now, many regulators have also started looking at this. So the University Grants Commission, which is the university regulator in India, has spoken in the past. I don't think they've really implemented this, but they've talked about the fact that if you publish in derecognized journals or predatory journals, that might impact your promotion and appointments. There is a national policy on academic ethics in India, which has come from the Office of the Principal Scientific Advisor, which also speaks to some of these issues. This is mentioned very clearly in our National Biomedical Research Ethics Guidelines in India, the Indian Council for Medical Research Guidelines, where there is a whole section on responsible conduct of research. You can freely download these guidelines and take a look, because they speak to many of these important issues. But there is a larger issue, which is also the issue of resource constraints, especially for scientists in low and middle income countries. There might be a limited history of peer review. There might be issues around cultures, as I was mentioning. This is helping each other become more, or having more papers. So gift authorship might be something which is considered acceptable within groups, etc. There might be some biases around loyalties, around religious, tribal, caste considerations. So all of those might impact why people indulge in research misconduct. But that's something, as I said, it is important for us to break that chain, to address these issues, and that's the only way we might be able to ensure that the science which is coming out from our institutions and our research groups perhaps is valid science, quality science, because that is the one which will actually bring about change from a policy and evidence perspective, and that impacts patient care, that impacts implementation of programs, and hence it is not something we should take lightly. Thank you for your attention. I know I had a lot of slides and a lot of content perhaps to cover, but I thought it'll be important for us to really do a deep dive into the problems and try to identify some of them. And hopefully through the discussion and through the case studies, we'll be able to further explore some of these issues. Thank you, and back to you, Arsh.
Thank you so much, Anand. I mean, particularly for me, I also have been hearing a lot about research ethics and publication ethics, but the point where you actually even gave out solutions, how do you handle ethical problems, is something that I think will be a major takeaway from this session. So thank you so much for the session. It was very insightful. And now we can probably go over to the next speaker, Dr. Jyoti. If you could just switch on your video and share your screen.
Thanks, Arushi. Please give me a minute while we are setting up the slides. Yeah. Thanks, Dr. Anand and Dr. Alex. Hello, everyone. I am Dr. Jyoti Bajaj, the Senior Manager for Content Integrity Services here at IndiaBioscience. And I'm going to cover some quick tips on publishing ethics and research integrity in scholarly publishing that Dr. Alex and Dr. Anand have already covered in some more detail. And then we'll move on to discussing some cases as well. So one thing to remember here is that when it comes to publication ethics, we're all responsible for this. I did find a question in the Q&A box here, and it was actually about how do we make sure that we are actually publishing ethically and making sure that whatever we are submitting as part of a work is within the ethical framework. So I just want to say here that everybody holds that responsibility, and all of us are responsible for that. Authors are responsible for the integrity of their work. Institutions play a very key role in ensuring that the right ethical approval procedures are in place to ensure that research is conducted responsibly at those institutions. Editors are responsible for ensuring that the right checks have been done. Reviewers are responsible for answering the questions asked of them regarding the validity and novelty of work. And publishers are responsible for making sure that the work that we publish and disseminate to the rest of the world has that integrity and can be trusted. So we all have a collective responsibility in this regard. Next slide, please. Yes. So specifically for authors, because I think from the audience, many of you are either the authors on some papers or are actually thinking of submitting your work to the journals. So I have some 5 key tips to share with you before we actually move on to discussing the cases further on. So the first one here is to really think about the authorship early on. For example, who should be an author on the work that you're presenting or submitting, understanding the criteria of the authorship and responsibilities that come with that authorship. Ensure that anyone that meets that criteria has been included in the author list, and be aware of roles and responsibilities of the corresponding author as well, so that you can choose the right corresponding author within your group. The corresponding author is responsible for ensuring that all authors agree on which journal to submit their manuscript to, and that all authors agree to any changes to the manuscript, including any changes to the authorship list. And ensuring that all relevant declarations have been made by all co-authors. I also want to highlight here, since Dr. Alex and Dr. Anant have also discussed about this, please note that AI tools must not be listed as an author, and its use must be stated along with how and why it was used in the manuscript. Tip 2, securely store original data and be ready to share if requested. Now, this is becoming more and more common practice that journals either mandate data sharing, or they at the very least expect you to be able to share if it is requested at any time or stage during your submission or even after the publication of your work. So please ensure that all your original data is clearly labeled and stored, so you're ready to share these files with the journal if and when requested. And ensure that the details of the participants is anonymized in the data sets that you need to share, or any data sets that you're actually saving for your work. So you're still responsible for sharing that data responsibly. Tip 3, so prior to submission, check the journal instructions very carefully. For what the journal you have chosen, check what are the editorial policies associated. Check what is mandatory for that journal to be included in your paper, because this may vary between different journals. You need to make sure that you can comply with any mandatory policies of the journal that you wish to submit your manuscript to. Otherwise, what will happen is that you will end up wasting time, and you would not want that, right? You would want to avoid wasting time. So check the editorial policies, check if there's anything mandatory required for the journal, like data deposition or data sharing, any sort of registration policies that are available on that journal page, and have them ready at the time of submission of the manuscript to the journal. Tip number 4, include declarations on ethical conduct of the study and any competing interest. So include all those key ethical approval statements, include information on informed consent if your study involves any kind of research participants, that is human subjects. Think about the ethics of the data that you may be using in your research. And ask yourself a question: can it potentially impact privacy of the research participants or the patients included in your study, or the data that you're handling for them? If anyone can be potentially identified from the data that you're sharing or disseminating, please make sure you have the consent to publish obtained from the patient, and you have declared that in your manuscript or submission that you have it with you. And include all the relevant competing interest statements and funding information for all the listed co-authors. It is also important to state here that please acknowledge the assistance by anyone and anything, and that also includes use of any kind of large language models like ChatGPT, because you do need to be transparent about its use, why it was used, and how it was used. And the final tip I would want to share here is cite all the relevant sources and the previous versions and obtain permissions for reuse. Dr. Anand did cover a lot of it in their slide about plagiarism. So make sure that anything that you are citing is appropriate, is balanced, and is relevant and reliable source. If there's any previous full version available of your article that is available either online or in other citable format, then please make sure that these are cited and make sure you have been transparent about using it in your paper. Ensure that permissions have been obtained from the copyright holder or license holder or owner of the third-party content. So for example, if you're using any kind of images or models, for example, that you haven't produced originally on your own, or that belong to any sort of a third party, make sure you have the correct permissions in place to be able to use that, and make sure that you also declare that in your manuscript. And finally, follow the ethical guidelines or guidance for use of any content, including any content from the social media. So hopefully, if you follow all of these tips, you will avoid some preventable problems. And so with that, we come to the end of this session. Thank you so much for your attention. And we will now move on to discussing the cases as well. So this is where I will actually start showing some cases on the screen. And it's also the time for you all to apply what we presented to you in this webinar. Hopefully you're familiar with them anyway. So let's look at some interactive case studies. These cases are actually based on some real scenarios. And for this part, there will be an anonymous poll window appearing on your screen as a pop-up. So answer the correct option you think in the poll window, but please don't type your answer in the chat box or Q&A box. So here's the first case, which is about the authorship dispute. I'll read out the case for you. The article, there's an article listing several authors, and it was peer-reviewed and accepted for publication by the editor. Once received by the production team, the corresponding author contacted the production editor and asked for one of their co-authors to be removed from the authorship list. The co-author was contacted for confirmation to be removed, but the co-author refused and provided a strong argument for why they meet the authorship criteria. The editor asked for an explanation from all the authors, and it transpired that the personal issues had led to a relationship breakdown between the corresponding author and the co-author. Now, what should the editor do? There are three options given here. Remove the co-author from the authorship list, or ask the co-author and corresponding author to come to an agreement before proceeding, or proceed to publish the article with the original author list. So in just a moment, we're going to launch the poll for you. You will see these options on your screen as part of the poll window. Please select your response here. Please select what would you prefer in the capacity of the editor, that what is it that they should do. We will keep the poll open for about 40-50 seconds to give everyone time to answer on the poll. If for any reason you can't select an option in the poll, please don't worry. This may not work perfectly with all internet browsers. We just want to get some idea from the people on the call, what they feel about all of these different options available. Okay. Okay, we are going to close the poll now. Thank you so much for marking your responses, everyone. And we are now going to share the poll results. Okay, so as you can see on the screen, most of you have actually voted for asking the co-author and the corresponding author to come to an agreement before proceeding. And then, one second, I actually lost the window on my screen. Okay, maybe the results have not have gone now. So most of you have actually answered asking the co-author and the corresponding author to come to an agreement before proceeding, but some of you have also answered about proceeding to publish the article with the original author list. I would say that the correct answer here would be 3 for this particular case, that is proceeding to publishing the article with the original author list. Jatin, we can actually move on to the next slide now. So as to show the correct answer. Yes, thank you. So it is important that all authors agree on the authorship list, and this is indicated by the fact that all the authors were contacted for clarification in this case. There are often relationship breakdown between the authorship groups, but if someone meets the authorship criteria of that journal, they should be listed as an author, and this should not be decided on the basis of their ongoing relationship between the group. Journals can't amend the authorship lists without agreement of all the authors involved. Therefore, if one of the authors are asking removal for the author, the journal cannot actually amend the authorship list. The journal can either proceed with publication of the article with the authorship list as it was submitted originally, or consider withdrawing the article entirely from the consideration by the journal until the authors can agree. As a food for thought for all of you, I'd also like to suggest here to think about what information would you need from the authors had you been the editor on this case. And with that, we can now move on to the next case, the case number 2, which is about consent for publication. Again, I'll read the case for you, which is available on the screen. So this is about a clinical case report detailing the outcomes of a patient's case, which was published in a medical journal. The case was anonymized as far as possible, but prior to publication, authors confirmed that the patient had given their consent for dissemination of their case, so it was published. However, after publication, the editor was contacted by a reader complaining that the clinical case was about them, and it breached their privacy as they never had consented to the publication of their details in the paper. The editor verified with the author that the complainant was indeed the patient. The author was asked to explain this, and they informed that they had informed the patient about their case would be disseminated, but hadn't specified this would be published in a journal. That means would be available either in a print format or would be available online. Specific consent for publication had not been obtained, and that was the conclusion of the case. So in the capacity of the editor, what do you think the editor should do? We again have like 3 options on the screen. Explain to the patient that as the article has already been published, nothing can be done. Or remove the content of the article due to breach of privacy and publish a removal notice. Ask the author to convince the patient to give consent for publication retrospectively. So we are going to launch the poll again. Here we go. Now please select which one of the 3 you would prefer. Remember, this needs to be answered from the capacity of the editor. So what do you think that the editor should do? There's certainly a clear preference coming up. Please take your time to vote. We are going to leave the poll open for another 20 seconds. And again, please don't worry if you're unable to vote or if you can't click on anything. Thank you everyone for participating. I am going to close the poll now and we will share the results with you. Yeah, so we have the results on the screen now, and there is a clear preference for the second option. That means removing the content of the article due to breach of privacy and publishing a removal notice. Thank you everyone for participating, and I actually agree with the response that most of you have voted for. Jatin, we can move on to the next slide. Yes, we can now see the correct answer also on the screen. So as case reports will focus on one patient's medical history, even while it may be fully anonymized, the patient will be able to identify themselves. we say that any three elements that make the patient's identity or that make the patient identifiable is actually should actually require consent for publication on the paper. So as such, the specific consent and permissions to publish should always be obtained from the patient for case reports. And most journals will have an editorial policy about this, which states this, and you will actually find it on the journal page as well, or on the editorial policies page as well. And if the authors cannot provide the documentation, then the article will be removed for including the patient information in their paper. So in this case also, we agree that the content of the article should be removed due to breach of privacy, and publishing a removal notice would mean that the scholarly record of the paper would still remain online. However, the content of the paper will be removed because it clearly breached the privacy of the patient. Now, what I'd like you to think about the case here is whether there's any specific piece of information you think you'd need from the authors while you are investigating in this case, if you were the editor on the paper. Now, moving on to the next case, the case number 3, which is about the textual overlap. Again, I'll quickly read the case for you. Several months after an article was published, which is paper 1, a reader contacted the editor to raise concerns about plagiarized text from their own recently published paper, which is paper 2. Comparison of the publication dates showed paper 2 had been published 2 months before paper 1 had been published, and upon investigation, the editor determined large sections of plagiarized text from several sources was present in the introduction, results, and discussion sections. These sections had been added after peer review in response to reviewers' comments about the requirement for further details and English language editing. The editor asked for an explanation from the authors, and they admitted to plagiarizing the text, excuse me, but insisted it was an error as they had intended to revise those sections prior to submitting to the journal. Now, as an editor, what would you do? Would you retract the article, or you would ask the authors to revise the plagiarized text and issue a correction notice, or do nothing as the article has already been published? Again, we are going to launch the poll, and you're going to see the pop-up window on your screen. We are going to leave the poll open for another 10 seconds for allowing everybody to vote available in the room. Okay, we can now close the poll and share the results. Okay, so we see a clear preference for the second option here, which is asking the authors to revise the plagiarized text and issue a correction notice. However, the correct answer here for this case would be retracting the article. Reason being, the case actually clearly mentions about a large section of textual similarity in introduction, results, and discussion, and that means it raises a question about how novel the findings are, which are discussed in the paper, or how original the paper is, and that is under question here. However, I agree that you may want to actually investigate it, and also because we can't actually have all the details included in the case here, but you may want to investigate it and accordingly, decide on what the next action step should be. However, please bear in mind that authors need to be accountable for the content within their articles, and all journals will ask the authors to confirm this when they submit their work, because they are supposed to sign an author agreement wherein they declare that the content of their article is original and that they are accountable for the content of the article that they're submitting. Any verbatim content needs to be fully referenced, and where possible, researchers should be paraphrasing with full attribution. So that is really important. However, recycling large verbatim sections is not only not only unethical, but could even be considered copyright infringement, which can be like a possibility in this case also. And with this in mind, the only option available to the editor in this scenario is the retraction of the article. Now, what I'd like you to think about this case over here is, what information do you think you would need to investigate this case or assess this case? And with that, we are now towards the end of the webinar. We are also done with the case discussions. Thank you so much for your attention, and we will now open the floor for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Jyoti. It was really insightful, especially the polls were very interesting. And I myself sort of struggled between choosing which two options I would have also chosen. So I'm sure it has given a lot of insights to everybody. And now we have a lot of questions in the Q&A box. I see some of them have already been answered, but now I'll hand over it to Jatin, and Jatin can take up the Q&A.
Thank you, Arushi. My greetings to the audience. I am Jatin Julka, Marketing Manager at Taylor & Francis Group. And firstly, I'd like to thank Dr. Anand, Alex, and Jyoti for the insightful discussion. I'm sure it was very useful for the audience. And I'm sure they will have questions for you. So without further ado, let's proceed to the Q&A. Just a reminder again, if you have any questions at all, please be sure to type them into the question box in your panel and I will take them up one by one. So let's get started. So I see some of the questions have been answered already, but for the sake of letting the entire audience know, I'll take this one up first. How do we overcome the fake research papers starting from research development up to publication? And I think this question will be open to everybody. Dr. Anand, Jyoti, Alex, any of you?
Sorry, Jatin, can you repeat the question once again?
Yeah, sure. The question is, how do we overcome the fake research papers starting from research development up to publication? So sounds like an ethical issue here.
Okay, thanks, Jatin.
Yeah.
Thanks for the question. I think this question comes in from the capacity of an author, thinking about yourself as an author on the paper. So I would suggest that when you are doing your research, there would be a part of the research wherein you would want to actually go over what is already available in the literature. And when you're actually going through the literature, please do have a look at what are the sort of articles and material that you are referring to. It is possible that anything which is provided in the literature is actually being researched over a period of time, and do you also find out that you have similar results being reported by different set of researchers as part of different studies, and also make sure that whatever articles that you're referring to should not have any sort of retraction notice or for that matter, removal notice. And even if you notice any kind of notice available on the articles online, it is also important to pay attention to what has been mentioned as part of the notice. It could be that there was an honest error at the author's end, and therefore there is a correction notice available. But it is also possible that the article that you're referring to has some major flaws in the data that has been reported, and that will actually help you to find out and pick papers which should be relevant and reliable for the study that you're doing and for referring to the right kind of literature. When you're doing your research as an author and as a researcher, you also have the responsibility to behave in an ethical manner. Not just referring to the right kind of literature, but also making sure that your research actually meets the required ethical standards. So make sure that you have the right kind of permissions from the ethics committee or from the IRB at your institution. Make sure that you're doing the experiments and giving those experiments the time that these experiments need. make sure that you're using the right kind of tools for conducting those experiments, and also if you are and also that you are declaring any sort of competing interest that you may have with any material that you're using, any data that you're using, or any particular piece of information that you may be including in your article or your manuscript. I think once you submit your manuscript to a journal, at the time of submission of your manuscript, make sure that you have all of your data and your material clearly labeled and stored, because you may be requested to provide your material at any stage during your submission or even after publication also. So you're responsible for also storing your data responsibly, and also making sure that you actually are able to provide the requested details from the journal editorial office. I think as from the perspective of an author and a researcher who's doing that research, I think this is the way you can actually make sure that all the steps are being done in an appropriate manner, and you're actually preventing the problems that may come if these steps are not actually followed properly.
Thank you for that answer, Jyoti. That was really in depth. I think we can move on to the next question. Dr. Anant, I believe this one will be for you. Academic bullying is real, where seniors will insist on being an author in the junior papers. So, what strategies can be employed to deal with this?
Open conversations around this. If we do not acknowledge this as an issue in our institutions, in our research groups, in the various areas of work that we do, then we'll not be able to address it. So part of that is an openness to accepting that this is an issue and trying to address it. Now, some institutions do have mechanisms where you can report to senior management, to leadership around bullying that you might be undergoing. Because, of course, part of that bullying might be directed in terms of publication practices, but bullying might be a more rampant issue about your daily conduct in that institution or how you're impacted, and could lead to, of course, poor mental health and well-being outcomes for many members of the team, right? So I think it's important to find mechanisms in your institutions where you could raise this as an issue, raise complaints, and figure out something which could be a solution. Now, some people, for example, shift out of a research group where bullying is happening into another research group. Some people might request for a change in principal investigator. In some institutions, it might just be that the culture has become as such that they're not willing to make any changes. So that puts you into a difficult situation where you might have to choose your own well-being over what choices exist within that institution. That's a little bit of a tough one. Externally, I think you can also reach out and complain to the university regulators if you're publishing and there you've been bullied into doing something which is clearly not in line with authorship criteria or acceptable criteria for publication. Then you could also reach out to journal editors. Some journals also have ethics advisors or ethics committees, or the equivalent of ethics committees, where you can raise some of these issues as well. So there are mechanisms. But quite honestly, I think the first step is actually acknowledging this and trying to address it institutionally and within our research groups, and bringing about that change. You know, if all of us can probably try to change the culture, then hopefully it will not be as much of an issue in the future. Thank you, Jyoti.
Thank you so much, Dr. Anant. I think we have another interesting question. I think you are the one to answer it. And like the question is that if one uses published material for teaching, which is generally allowed, and then prepares reading material for circulation among students using figures, data, etc., is it going to be a violation of copyright? And similarly, can you make videos of such lectures where one has used the materials from these publications and like to generate your own publicity or for private viewing, just to address the class that you are teaching?
Of course, refer to and use academic publications which are in journals, because, you know, of course, you're building on science, right? It's not like we create content that we teach out of thin air. It has to come from established science. And I think it's considered acceptable to use published literature. What is usually sometimes not allowed for is putting it up on a public website database, especially if it's copyrighted. But within the confine of an academic group, if you are making it available, especially within universities or colleges, it might be acceptable. If we have more and more open access science, then this will be less of an issue because it's an open access resource. You just share the link and anyone with an internet connection should be able to use it. But even if it is not open access, as long as you're using it for academic purposes and it's not part of publicly facing platforms such as a website, it should be generally okay. YouTube videos, again, I think, just by way of example, that many of us refer to articles in our presentations today. If this were to be put up by IndiaBioscience or TNF on their YouTube channels, that would be the same thing, right? But as long as we are clearly acknowledging source and we are contextualizing that reference, it should be okay. What would not be okay is if I chose content from 10 different sources and I did not acknowledge that on my slides and then made claims that I had come up with that idea, then of course that would be problematic and people could raise concerns about me stealing information and or important anecdotes and sharing. So I think as long as proper attribution is there and you follow the guidelines, you should be okay. But just always keep this in mind when you're preparing for a talk, because even if it doesn't land up on YouTube, there might be a student who's taking pictures or videos and putting it up on their Instagram reel or on Twitter, right, or on Facebook or LinkedIn, right? So caution is always good. Again, if you follow the guidelines, you should be okay.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Nand. Alex, I think this next question is for you. As we know, most of the articles are accessed via Scientific Hub because of the huge money in accessing it. So are there any problems in citing a literature accessed via Scientific Hub?
What I would encourage here is many of the papers and articles available on Sci-Hub will be available by their publisher on their website. So I'd encourage you to go to that source, because sometimes there are updates to articles. So I would encourage everybody to go to the original publisher's website where possible, or try and contact somebody who is a contact for that journal. So rather than going through Sci-Hub, I would speak to the various publishers who publish the journal, or have a look on their website, because there may be updates to articles that you're missing. So that's really important to go to the source of the people who publish the papers. And with open access journals, that should be quite easy, but obviously with subscription journals, it may be more difficult. Also, your librarian may be aware of the publishers for the different journals or titles that you're interested in. So I would definitely speak to them in most cases. They're a good resource.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you. The next question that we have is how to make sure that we are selecting good and right journals and not fake ones for our papers. I think Jyoti or Alex, you can answer this one.
Alex, do you want to go? Because you covered that as well.
Yes.
Sorry, I can't hear you, Jyoti.
I think Jyoti was just saying I should have a stab at answering the question. So with fake journals, I would definitely use some of the resources that I posted in the chat. So think, check, submit. Also, perhaps check for open access titles, check the directory of open access journals, because not everything may be listed in by Clarivate in the JCR, the Journal Citations Report, or they may not have a site score. So I would definitely go to directory of open access journals, think, check, submit, look at COPE. If you want to have a real look at some of the worst possible cases of publication ethics, Retraction Watch is quite a good resource as well. So I would urge everybody to look at those sites to check. But ultimately, even some quite senior scientists have been fooled by fake journals. It's ask your colleagues, talk to as many people as you can. If you have suspicions, write to the journal itself, and you should get a sensible answer if you have a question.
Thank you, Alex. I think another general question, is it allowed to use ChatGPT for solving language problems while preparing manuscripts? And if not, why?
I'll take it up, Jatin, if I'm audible properly.
Yeah, Jyoti, you are.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thanks, Jatin. Thanks for the question. So Taylor and Francis supports the responsible use of generative AI tools, which also includes ChatGPT. And that respects high standards of data security, confidentiality, and copyright protection as well. So, in that perspective, it would be okay to actually use generative AI tools for language improvement. However, it still falls within the accountability of the author to make sure that that doesn't compromise the confidentiality of the data that they are going to submit to the journal. The other ways that these AI tools can be used. It could be about taking some assistance in improving the language. But one thing to remember here is that it should not actually replace any of the core researchers' work. So it should not be used for example, idea generation. It should not be used for synthesizing any sort of a data for your research or for your work that you are going to submit or that you are planning to do. It should not really write the entire article for you as an author, because you can't really treat an AI tool as an author, because it can't be accountable for the work that you're going to submit. And also making sure that it doesn't hamper the data security, doesn't hamper the confidentiality of your data, and also aligns with the required copyright policies that should be there in place.
Thank you, Jyoti. I think we can take one last question up for today. Is sole authorship ethical? Because some institutions require it to show the ability to be individually capable of conducting research. So I believe Dr. Anand, you can talk about this. Sorry, Dr. Anand, I think you're not, yeah.
Yes, no?
Yeah, you're audible now.
All right, okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
please
what
go
I'm
ahead.
saying is that I'd be very surprised to see a single author paper if it was based on, let's say, a lab experiment or something which was clinical in nature, where you are dealing with a patient or patients. Typically single author papers are for reviews, are for commentaries, are for editorials. But anything which requires you to do collaborative science, it'd be very surprising to actually only have a single author. And maybe editors and peer reviewers, if it's open peer review, might pick up on that. I think what's more relevant is to show the capability to be the lead or the first author, which is usually the person who does the bulk of the work, right? And sometimes in institutions, there is a requirement for you to have a certain number of first author publications for promotion, etc. Because then you're demonstrating leadership, that you are the one who took the initiative, you are the one who coordinated the project, ran most of the experiments, or did the bulk of the work. And you have also then translated that into writing of a manuscript, being the lead author, etc. That is something which I think is more common, either as first author or corresponding author, and a requirement to have a certain number of publications to demonstrate merit. Now, of course, we can question whether that is a real test of merit, etc., but that's how institutional policies often. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Anand. So we are right on time, and I understand that we have some more queries. So I would encourage the audience that please mark your questions to us. We'll collate maximum answers for you. And I have just dropped our emails in the chat box. Thank you to all our attendees. We really appreciate you being here. And a special thanks to Dr. Anand, Alex, and Jyoti for facilitating this important conversation around medical publishing. Your insights have been invaluable for this workshop, so thank you. And with this, we have come to the end of the session, and we hope that you found this session useful. I'll now proceed to close the session, and thank you all for joining. Have a very good evening.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.